Hi, everyone. I'm Shantalea Johns, your colleague at Wayne State University School of Social Work in Detroit, Michigan. I am also one of the co-creators of this e-tutorial, Advising with Care. You are currently walking through Module 1, which is Understanding Trauma. You can't quite fully understand trauma unless you take some time to understand how trauma can impact the brain. So this video is going to walk you through parts of the brain and how it's impacted when someone experiences a traumatic event. This is important to you because we know a lot of our students silently carry trauma histories with them to the classroom or to your advising sessions, or they may experience a traumatic event while they're on campus. And these experiences could impact them in ways that you may not realize, or they may not even realize. So it's important for us to understand some neurobiology or neuroscience as it relates to trauma so that we can understand just how fully these experiences can impact our students and their academic success, and why it's so important for you to be in this tutorial learning about ways in which you can offer support. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for watching this video. In Module 1, we're talking about something that students often carry with them silently, and that's trauma. During this short video, we're going to discuss trauma and how it can rewire the brain and its impact on learning, decision-making, and emotional well-being. As academic advisors, understanding this gives us better tools to use when we're supporting the whole student. So let's begin. Let's start by answering the question, what is the brain? The brain is the body's control center. It manages everything we think, we feel, and do. It's responsible for our thoughts, memories, emotions, senses, movement, breathing, hunger, and even our body temperature. Working together with our spinal cord, the brain forms what is called the central nervous system, or CNS, which keeps our entire body connected and functioning. Now you might be wondering, how does the brain work? The brain communicates by sending and receiving signals or messages all throughout the body. These signals tell your body what to do and how to feel. For example, some signals make us feel sleepy, while others let us know when something hurts. Some messages stay inside the brain to help us think, so like think through things and process emotions, while actually other signals travel down our spinal cord and through the nervous system to control our movement and our body function. And all of this is happening through billions of nervous cells called neurons. They all work together to keep our body running and connected. At the highest level, there are three main parts of the brain: the cerebrum, or what we like to call the front of the brain, the brainstem, which is the middle of the brain, and the brainstem actually connects the cerebrum with the spinal cord. And lastly, we have the cerebellum. And some people like to call that the little brain because it's like this little fist size, you can see in the image there, the fist size portion of the brain that's located in the back of our head. Each brain hemisphere, which is the picture shown here on your screen, has four sections called lobes: the frontal, the parietal, the temporal, and the occipital. It's always a tongue twister for me. Each lobe controls specific functions of the brain. We're not going to go over those in detail because we don't have a lot of time, but I just wanted you to see an image of the lobes. And on the next slide, we're going to focus on a few of them and how they are involved in some of our everyday activities. Now, I know I said that we wasn't going to go over the lobes, but we kind of have to if we want to talk about some of the brain's functional areas. So let's start with the frontal lobe, which is the largest part. Oops, see there, the largest part of our brain, the purple and kind of greenish area there, that deals with movement and the and our speech. But it also does quite a few other things that are important and sets context to what we're going to be talking about today. So our frontal lobe also deals with, well, I should say it's really considered our command center because it controls things like our thinking, our planning, our problem solving, our emotional control, and our movement and our speech. So it helps us when we need to make a decision. It helps us control our emotion, our impulses and our emotions, and it helps us plan ahead. So an example of this is if you or your students make a decision to study instead of watching Netflix, that's your frontal lobe or your prefrontal cortex at work. And your motor, your voluntary movement is also there as well. So that is important for us to know as we set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. So that's your frontal lobe. Our parietal lobe is in the middle of our brain, and it helps us with processing sensory information like touch, temperature, and body position. So, an example of this is when you feel the warmth of a coffee mug. The parietal lobe is processing that sensation. We also have our body's ability to understand where you are in space. And interesting enough, athletes really rely on this part of their brain because it helps with coordination of movement. So this is again the middle part of your brain here. So with our sensations, our hearing, and also the Werwick area is also in the middle part of our brain, and that helps our brain understand spoken language. And last but not least is our occipital portion of our brain, and that deals mainly with our vision, and it is in the back of our brain. And what's not here on our picture is the temporal lobe, which is also important because it deals with short term memory, speech, music rhythm, and some degree of smell recognition. The limbic system is what we call the emotional and motivation core of the brain. In this part of our brain, we have the amygdala, which processes emotions like fear, anger, and pleasure. An example is when you jump, when you hear a loud noise, that's your amygdala responding. The hippocampus forms and retrieves memories, and the hypothalamus regulates hunger, thirst, sleep, and body temperature. So, together, those structures shape our emotional reactions and our memories, especially during those times when our body is trying to keep us safe. So in survival mode. I also just want to point out, why does keep doing this? Come back, stop. Your pituitary gland is also shown here in your limbic system, and that deals with a lot of other glands in your body. It regulates the flow of different hormones from your thyroid, adrenaline, your ovaries, your testicles. It also receives chemical signals from your hypothalamus through its stalk and blood supply. So, all of this information about the brain is connected to trauma really in a deep way. When a person experiences trauma, whether emotional, physical, or environmental, it changes how the brain functions. Trauma can affect areas like the amygdala, so the fear and the emotional processing, the hippocampus, memory, and the prefrontal cortex, which deals with decision making and reasoning. So, what this means is when a student who's experienced trauma may struggle with memory, focus, organization, or even emotional regulation, not because they're unmotivated or lazy, but because their brain is operating in survival mode. So, understanding these changes helps you see behaviors as a response to stress or trauma, and not as a reflection of one's ability. Understanding the general structure and functions of the brain on the previous slides is only the beginning. We want to look deeper into how trauma and injury affects brain activity because it gives us some really good insight into why students may think, feel, and behave the way that they do. Recent research used different brain imaging technology to really look at the invisible struggles of our brains, showing clear differences between a healthy brain and those brains that have been impacted by trauma or a personal injury. One study highlighted, which is shown here by Daniel Amid and his colleagues in 2015. And just a little bit about this psychiatrist actually has a lot of different brain labs. I think it's 4 across the country. But what's very unique about this researcher is that he has one of the largest databases of brain scan. So he's looked at a lot of different brains. I believe at the time I did my research on him, he had about 83,000 brain scans that him and his colleagues have been studying. And so they, for this image, this is a image from his website. There's the citation there at the bottom. This one, done again in 2015, compared brain activity of individuals with post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, or those who are experiencing both. So you have a healthy brain, classic post-traumatic stress disorder, classic traumatic brain injury, and those who have experienced both. So let's walk through the different images that we see here. You see on the left is a healthy brain. It looks smooth and warm and evenly colored, especially in the back where the cerebellum sits. That means that blood is flowing properly and the brain activity is balanced. So when we have a healthy brain, we can think clear, focus, and recover from stress more easily. So for our students with a healthy brain, that student is rested, nourished, and supported in a way that gives them the freedom, brain freedom, to learn and problem solve more effectively. Now let's move to the brain that has been impacted by post-traumatic stress disorder. You can see that it looks like there are some extra bright spots in the emotional and alertness areas like the amygdala, and the thalamus area. And this brain shows that it's on high alert. So you see more activity. The brain is constantly scanning for danger, even when it's none present. So when someone has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, their brain is constantly scanning the environment for danger. And sees a lot of activity there. So why this matters for us is because when a student has experienced trauma to the point where they haven't been able to recover and they have a diagnosis of, maybe post-traumatic stress disorder, they may appear anxious or jumpy or easily overwhelmed because their brain is really stuck in that survival mode with a lot of activity going on. So you may see a student who panics over a late assignment because their brain is reacting to that late assignment as it would if there was a serious threat going on, because again, there's a lot of activity happening in the brain. So that late assignment for that brain feels like a threat to them. So they're going to react in that way. Now let's move to the traumatic brain injury brain. And what you can see here is actually low activity. So the brain almost kind of looks a little dim or blank in some spots where the blood isn't really flowing as it should. And so what this means is that the brain has probably been physically injured and it's reducing its ability to send and process signals effectively. And this matters to us because if we have students with a history of concussions or head traumas, then they may have trouble concentrating, remembering details, staying awake in class. And again, this is not because they're not interested, it's because it is from the energy loss in their brain. So you also may see a student with a traumatic brain injury, you may see them needing to reread the same paragraphs over and over again. And even if they do, they still can't retain the information, again, because there's a lot of low activity happening in their brain. Their brain isn't sending and receiving information as it should. Now, what about when post-traumatic stress disorder and a traumatic brain injury is in the brain? Dr. Ed.D has given us these wonderful examples to see just how different our brain is functioning. So let's look in here. When those two conditions are present, you will see some overreaction. That's from the PTSD part, and then underreactive from the traumatic brain injury side. And what this means is that when emotional trauma or physical injury happens together, the brain struggles with both hyper arousal, so too much activity, and hypoactivity, too little energy happening. So you may see a student fluctuating between anxiety and exhaustion, or maybe describing that they feel off or disconnected. So there may be a student who may seem attentive one day and spaced out the next. So both parts of their brain is trying to respond, but maybe no problems are being solved at that space. So understanding how trauma changes the brain activity, and we're so thankful for Dr. Ed and his colleagues and the work that they're doing, because it helps us interpret behavior through a neurobiological lens rather than a judgment one. So it tells us that we can kind of tell when a student's brain is overworked, tired, or even stuck in stress from these examples that we just talked about. And you know what we can do? We can start to adapt our advising sessions. So maybe when someone's brain is overactive, maybe we can slow down our tone. Perhaps we can give clear directions, check for understanding. We have to remind students that healing and learning are both possible, even if these things are present, because we know that the brain has the ability to rewire itself. But in order for it to rewire itself, it needs time, it needs safety, and it needs repetition to build those new pathways. And that's something that we can explain to our students who feel like maybe they just can't go any further, or they have self-defeating ideas or unhelpful thinking patterns. You can help them know that their body is responding to what's happened to them, and it's not a reflection of their ability. As we shift to this slide, let's talk about how or what actually happens inside the brain and body during a traumatic event. When a person experiences something terrifying or unexpected or deeply threatening, the brain doesn't stop to think, it reacts. Because you remember, our brain is designed to keep us safe. In that moment, survival really becomes our priority. And so you remember the amygdala and the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex, they are all center stage when your body feels like you are under a threat and is trying to keep you safe. So in times of balance, those same three regions are working together beautifully. But during trauma, the balance is sort of lost. So the amygdala, it goes into overdrive. The hippocampus struggles with organizing or making sense of what happened. And the prefrontal cortex, which is our rational voice, temporarily shuts down. Along with those brain changes, the body releases some powerful surges of stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. And that is needed because just in case we have to fight, flight, or freeze. So understanding this process helps us make sense of why people might react in ways that seem confusing later. It's in those moments when it's not when their body is doing what it needs to do to keep them safe and alive. I want to tell you about a student I once met named Maya. Maya was an honor student in high school, so people may have described her as being sharp and social, always on top of her work. But after a serious car accident, things seemed to have changed for her. Even months later, she couldn't concentrate in class. Loud noises made her jump, and she felt like she was constantly on edge, very exhausted at the same time. Her teachers thought that she wasn't even trying. Like they questioned what happened. She was on top of her game at once, and at one point, and now she wasn't. But what they didn't see was that her body and her brain was still trying to live in that moment where she was in danger, long after the car accident was over. And so what I know is, even though this was a high school student I was working with in clinical practice, I know her story isn't unique. When the brain experiences trauma, it doesn't always reset once the event ends. Instead, it can get stuck in that survival mode, and that's what we saw with Maya, was that her brain was stuck in the moment in which she was in when it perceived that she was in danger. And that's where some of the long-term effects of trauma start to set in. So when trauma becomes chronic or when the body never fully processes the event, three major biological shifts can occur. Neurotransmitter deregulation, and that's when the brain's chemical messages fall out of balance, affecting our mood and our focus. Chronic cortisol imbalances are also seen, and that's when the body's main stress hormones stay high or even crash so low, disrupting sleep, our immune system, and our energy. Cognitive and emotional impairments. So another long-term effect may show up, and that's where you see individuals may have troubles with their thinking, their memory, their emotional regulation, and it's all suffering because um, the brain has been rewired. So one of our goals, if we do come across a student who has chronic stress or their body hasn't been able to reset after trauma, what our goal is to do is to help students try to restore regulation, rebuild neural balance, and relearn that they are safe, teaching their bodies that they're safe. And so some of the interventions that have we've done in practice, but also you can do as an advisor, is teach breathing exercises, grounding exercises, help them go through body sensation sessions where they're able to calm their body from the stress response before they're processing thoughts. So that might mean you tell your student before class, maybe take some deep breaths, do some grounding exercises to really try to calm your body before you have to go into class and start to process information. We can also do routines and predictability. And so what that looks like is that we are maybe helping the student get accommodations where they're able to know what is going to be talked about in class before they get there. So that sort of structure actually helps the brain start to feel safe again because they know what to expect. Because usually when someone experiences a trauma, it's a sudden event or series of events that threatens your safety. But when someone has a routine and they know what to expect, then that helps them gain a sense of safety. We also look at safety in terms of consistency and compassionate academic advising. So when a student is able to feel like they can trust you and you're consistent and you're showing a level of compassion and empathy, then you're reteaching the brain that it's safe to trust again. So there are stuff that we can do as advisors to help reverse some of these long-term effects that can happen when our students experience a traumatic event. Let's revisit Maya's story. You remember months after the car accident, even when she wasn't in danger, her body didn't seem to know that? Well, we also realized that she was having some other symptoms as well. She was having her heart was racing a lot when she was in class, and she would get startled each time someone would slam the door. She forgot assignments that she had just written down, and teachers often would tell her that she looked like she was distracted. But again, you remember what was happening there? That her brain was still processing as if she was right in the middle of the accident. So when we think about how when stress becomes really chronic, again, there are some structural and functional brain changes that happen. And so we talked a little bit about this, but the amygdala, and that deals a lot with our emotions, it begins to fire really easily. So it's overactive. Often it's reacting too often and too frequently. And so that means that the student may start to signal or receive dangers even in safe moments. So you may have a student who lived through, let's say, a community violence. And so they may react when a book drops as if that was a gunfire. Their amygdala can't distinguish between past dangers and present safety anymore. So their amygdala is overreactive. So when we think about how the hypothalamus shrinks, you remember the hippocampus. The hippocampus deals a lot with our organization and our conceptualization of memories. And when a student has experienced a traumatic event or chronic stress, this parts of their brain makes it hard for them to process new information, remember consequences, and distinguish between the then and the now. So they may start to have flashbacks or intrusive memories. And sometimes people describe them as being so vivid that they feel like they're right in those moments. And the brain rate doesn't have a chance to fully process the past because they're reliving those memories. So you may see someone who that are safe, but in their mind they feel like they're in danger. And that's because their hippocampus can't regulate memory clues anymore. So the brain job, and all this is happening because again, the brain's job is to protect us, even if it means overprotecting us after a danger is gone. But the same neuroplasticity that wired trauma, it can also wire healing inside. And that's the key that we want to be able to share. That's the hope that we want to share. That each time we're able to practice some of the trauma informed principles that we'll talk about in this e-tutorial, we are helping to the brain begin to wire itself back towards balance. And that's the good news. So as we're kind of wrapping up this video, I wanted to point out an article that we have posted in Module 1, and it talks about how childhood trauma can impact college students. And here's some of the themes in the article and some of the key findings. And I want you to really take time to read this because it reminds us of a few things. It reminds us just how prevalent childhood traumas are, how they can impact our physical, mental, academic, and social health. And also, what I like about this article is that it talks about some interventions, so trauma-informed campus programs that can be helpful to students. Yeah, just wanted to give you some additional reading to make this connection because what we know is students don't leave their past stories at the door. They bring them with them when they come to our campuses. And it's our hope through this e-tutorial that we are showing a level of empathy and compassion to these students and helping them find resources that can take them to a place where they feel safe, connected, and calm, and their brains are rewiring itself to the healthy brain that allows them to learn and thrive while they are in college with you. Here's also some citations for you in case you wanted to dive a little bit deeper into trauma's impact on college students' learning. So there's just some few articles that I was able to pull over from recent articles that looked at how trauma can impact a student. So these are just some additional resources for you to explore. This slide presents some example intervention approaches that can be used to support your student who has experienced a traumatic event. Your goal is to try to help that student or create a space for all your students where it feels safe, they can rely on you, they can develop a sense of trust. I'm also hoping that through this e-tutorial, you will be able to recognize some of the trauma responses. So I gave you the brain science behind those responses and where they show up in the brain and how they can impact our students. And then the goal really isn't for you to become a therapist or a counselor or a trauma specialist, but the goal is really for you to work in collaboration with others on your campus who are trained to offer some professional support to these students and refer them. So notice what's happening and refer the student to appropriate professional help. Within that, we're also keeping in mind cultural humility, and we're looking at the student through a strength-based lens. So again, that means that we are recognizing their strengths, recognizing that what has happened to them doesn't signal that they can't be successful in college. We have conversations with students about what brings them joy, what other strengths they have. Remind them that there's other parts to them that can be celebrated, and that can be such a healing conversation for someone who may feel defeated or unsafe on campus when you're able to highlight their strengths. It's like, yes, this has happened to you, but let's talk about your resiliency. Let's talk about your ability to connect with others. Let's talk about your ability to recall information. So remind them of their strengths. And then also some self-help strategies, such as mindfulness and yoga and grounding exercises that can be done if you're comfortable leading students in mindfulness sessions just before the advising session starts, or referring students to maybe events on campus that incorporate some self-help strategies that they can use to um, help calm their nervous system. So as we come to the end of this video, I want you to pause and take in this image. Notice the balance of colors and light, the strength and the softness that exists together to make this flower. And just a fun fact, this is a flower from my garden. So just like this flower, healing from trauma is much like this in that it doesn't all happen at once. I mean, I wish I could plant these dahlia roots and just like that they grow, but it doesn't all happen at once. Just like these flowers take time, water, proper sunlight to grow, the brain and the body also needs time to grow, make new connections, balance, and bring about beauty after stress and pain. So the amygdala can learn to feel safe again. The hippocampus can begin to rebuild memory with context and peace. And also the prefrontal cortex can regain its calm and authority. It's again about looking at advising practices that includes a trauma-informed lens that we're going to talk about that really helps reteach the brain and the nervous system that the danger has passed. So as you look at this beautiful flower that I grown, and I see a little fly in the picture, but that's okay. Remember this: growth after trauma is not only possible, so we can all um, uh, grow from what has happened to us. But it's going to take time. It's going to take safety. It's going to take the right environment for it to grow. And so thank you again for your time, and let's proceed with the e-tutorial.